Hello, my name is Iwan van Beurden. I'm the CTO and Director of Product and Service Development here at Exida. And today I'm going to talk to you about SILstat, our live event recording software. To be a little bit more precise, I'm going to talk to you about how you can collect safety critical data using SILstat to compare your assumed performance with your actual performance and see if there's any need for improvement, or maybe extending proof tests and things like that. We're very excited to announce a new version of our SILstat software, which will be released in 2024, just a couple of months from now. This new application is going to be completely web-based designed, which means that the application will run on your laptop, on a Surface Pro, on an iPad, arguably even on your cell phone, though that screen resolution is probably going to be a little too small. And obviously it will work perfectly on your desktop. This web-based design allows many users to access the SILstat environment at the same time and collaboratively work on documenting actual operational performance. The new SILstat is going to be completely based on and aligned with Excellentia 4. And what that means is that concepts that we introduced in Excellentia 4, like devices and device models and libraries, you will see those as well in SILstat. So in SILstat we'll talk about libraries, and SILstat will have device models and device model failure rate information, devices and device failure rate information, and so on. The new version of SILstat will have user configurable dashboards. These dashboards will give you key information as to how your safety and Samana functions perform with regard to failure rates, assumed and actual failure rates, but also we'll talk about how often the proof tests are performed, when proof tests are due, and what the demand rates are when demands are occurring in your system. Lastly, we have enhanced third-party integration through a new data API. And this data API will allow for you to easily transfer information between SILstat and, for example, a historian or your SAP type interface to optimally collect data and share information that is being collected. I assume that most of you are familiar with the functional safety lifecycle. Functional safety lifecycle shows an analysis phase, a design and implementation phase, and then lastly an operational phase. And one of the things that we ask ourselves is, how well is the safety instrumented system that we designed in our design and implementation phase, how well is that performing in operation? What's the performance we're getting from the performance that we needed? What's the performance that we're getting from the performance that we assumed that we were getting? These are the types of questions that you will be able to answer when you use SILstat. Most will find the collection of data a very cumbersome, time-consuming activity, and it can be. But SILstat will help you streamline that data collection, help you identify where your weak points are in your design, if there's any problem children with regard to specific devices, or if there's specific areas in your plant that are more prone to equipment failure than others. And it will help you get this information in an easy way that can be matched to your current work processes. SILstat will help in collecting safety critical information. Think of hazardous events, maybe initiating events, failure of protection layers, device failures, for example a transmitter or valve in a safety and Samana function, the proof tests that need to be performed, as well as maintenance activities that need to be performed, for example at the end of useful life or at the end of mission time. This data collection will help you validate the assumptions that you made during your analysis phase and design and implementation phase of the safety and Samana system. The resulting actual data can help you in future designs For example, by coming to the conclusion that your failure rates are lower than expected, and maybe you can have longer proof test intervals, or based on actual demand rates versus originally assumed demand rates, you can have different risk requirements on the initial safety instrument function to begin with. If we're looking at the information that we're collecting, we're getting some key metrics out of that. So for example, we collect hazardous event data, which means that we will know what the initiating event frequencies are in reality, and what we assume, we can compare them to what we assumed those initiating event frequencies were, and with that we can support the LOPA that we did, our layer of protection analysis. We get on-demand success and failure of safeguards or independent protection layers, as well as the safety instrumented system and safety instrumented functions. And we can get actual versus assumed probabilities of failure on demand and failure rates. And again, this could help support our LOPA, and this could help support our SIL verification. We will look at the testing performance for proof test and routine maintenance based on the equipment that we're selecting, based on the testing frequencies that we've defined. We can then see, are those test frequencies actually achieved in real life, yes or no? And then lastly, think about things like bypasses, repair activities, and overall management of change. By collecting that type of information, we will be able to see if things like a mean repair time and emission time are indeed as assumed. How can you get started with SILstat? Well, very easily if you've been using the Excellentia software. In the Excellentia software, you've been using the PHA, the LOPA tool, you've been using SIL verification. These are all tools that define what the actual setup is of your system, of your plant with regard to its protection layers. If you started with Excellentia, you can just simply transfer that information into SILstat, which would automatically generate your plant hierarchy, define the devices, define proof test, and so on. And this will all form the backbone of your SILstat database. And it is a matter of a minute or two if you have a very large Excellentia file. In addition to that, we can use our data API to import information from third-party sources, which could be a spreadsheet if that's where you have your information stored. But with the data API, we can quickly import that information into the SILstat database. Each organization will have its own dedicated database in our cloud solution. Each organization can define their own team roles, the permissions, and any notifications that they want to have communicated to the various users of the software. We can set up targeted tasks for the users and workflows that we want to implement. Each user can tailor the SILstat environment to their preferences. We're obviously have the single sign-on experience with Office 365 or Microsoft 365. We are looking at contact information, organizational information, your profile picture, title, department may all be automatically transferred over from that single sign-on environment, for example. But then we're also looking at different countries and regions. So we're very much aware of GDPR rules in Europe, and by identifying the region that a user is based in, we can make sure that the appropriate rules are being followed. Users can specify language, time zones, date and time format. And that means they can change the language of the interface. So obviously I would be using English, but I would be using my English US version, whereas my colleagues in Ireland will be using Irish-based English, and there's a little difference between Z's and S's, for example. But if you have a user in Germany or if you have a user in France, we can easily switch between the English language or the German or French or Japanese or Chinese for that matter, all within the same interface. It's the same application, the user simply defines what the language is that they want to interface with. And this also goes along with date and timestamps. In the US, we tend to say month, date, year. In Europe, we tend to say year, month, date. In my opinion, the best way to solve this problem is to use 2 digits for the day, 3 letters for the month, and then 4 digits for the year. So that's my preference. But some people may prefer to say 9/12/2023 or 12th, 9th month, 2023, meaning the same thing, but just different display option. And then we also have different themes, different color themes for different users. We have a light theme, a dark theme, and then we also have a accessibility theme with very distinctive color. So for people that have a little bit more difficulty identifying different colors. The SILstat homepage will give you some different pieces of information. There is an overview of recent activities. So think of, hey, I did a proof test or I did a certain install event. That will all show up in these recent event lists. Then there is a list of tasks. Those could be specific tasks that are assigned to me, for example, to perform a proof test or to perform a replace event. These could also be approval tasks that are assigned to me. So maybe a failure was detected in the field and the instrument tech recorded that information, and now I need to review it and make sure that the failure classification was done correctly. So there may be an approval task assigned to me and so on. So the homepage will immediately tell me if there's any specific activity that I need to do. And in some cases, as you can see here, some events are overdue. So maybe a proof test wasn't done yet, and I really should get my act together and start doing that proof test. Some other information insights are shown, and think of number of failures, number of demands, any overall data health information really to give you at a glance basically an idea as to what's going on in the system. One of the first steps when you start using SILstat is to configure the SILstat setup, which means define a planned hierarchy. And different users like different ways to do that. Some people like to look at it more from a logical structure, so they think in CIFs. Some customers like to think in a physical direction, saying, hey, all this equipment is part of this particular unit. Within SILstat, we allow you to switch between these different views. We know the concept of CIF. Obviously, they come from our SIL verification tool, Silver. We know the concept of locations. That may be a relationship between the PHA and the Silver and so on. And you can switch between one and another. We can assign procedures at different levels. So you can assign a proof test, for example, at a CIF level, or at a group level, or maybe at the initial device level, whatever works for you. So we can account for that with different intervals if necessary and so on. And then lastly, there's a search capability where that will help you find items, find devices within your overall hierarchy. Each change to the SILstat database is traced for auditability. So whenever a user adds a new device, we will know who added the device, when they did it, and where. So we can at any point see what's happening within our environment. If someone makes a mistake, hey, we can pinpoint this is when the mistake was made. Maybe we need to add some training to avoid the mistake from being made in the future. Or when we get to actual event recording, we know who the users are that are recording the events. So that also helps with evaluation of data. Hey, yes, the user who recorded this event is Bob. Let me go talk to Bob and make sure that I understand what he recorded here. Once the configuration is done, we will start collecting information. And the information that we're collected, we really hit on it already, is hazardous event information, device failures, tests that are being performed, proof tests, as well as maintenance activities to make sure that we meet those intervals that we assumed, that we have those replace activities at the end of useful life or at the end of mission time. But when we talk about hazardous events, we are recording not just that an initiating event occurred, but also what part of my overall sequence of events stopped the initiating event from propagating and becoming an accident. So in this particular screenshot, we see that the initiating event occurred, BPCS failure, and that the safety instrument function was successful in stopping it from becoming an accident. In most cases, we will have many independent protection layers or many safeguards, and we can indicate which one was successful, which one was not. We can calculate what the demand rates are on the individual protection layers. If a safety instrument function fails, and of course, assuming we've modeled it in silver, we know all the devices, we can immediately do a deep dive and say, hey, this valve was the one that failed. Everything else was happy, but this valve just didn't move. Or this transmitter failed. The valve was never asked to really close. So we can keep track of that and immediately record that when we collect data. The user can define the workflows for these collection events, including mandatory review steps and approvals that are needed. As we start to collect data, we can start looking at the individual devices, and each device will have its own life cycle within SILstat. We know when it was installed, we know when it was taken out of service, if we've reached that point. But in between, we can see how often it was bypassed, if there's any repairs that were being made, or any tests being performed on it, and so on. So if we can see a device with many repairs, then we'll have a little red flag go off and say, look at this device. It looks like it's a troublemaker. We may need to look at that in a little bit more detail. Each collection event will be added to a device's timeline. So of course, when it applies to that device. We talked about bypass, replace, repair, as well as remove events. So at the end of the life of the device. Once you're collecting information, you want to see that information. And we do that on our dashboard. And we have a couple of system dashboards that include preset widgets for easy analysis right out of the box. You get SILstat, you launch it, you'll have a dashboard. There won't be any useful information because you haven't collected anything yet, but out of the box we have default widgets. These widgets can be configured. You can, put your own timelines on it, your own areas that you want to look at, and so on. But you can also rearrange those widgets in user-defined dashboards. And you may have a particular organization that's very interested in one area of the plant. You can make a dedicated dashboard for that and share that among all the users, in addition of having individual dashboards. So the tool is very flexible there. It allows you to configure that dashboard any way you like. In addition to the dashboards, which will give you the current information, we can also generate reports. And those are long form reports that can give you all the details with regard to device failures for a particular area or for an entire site, and so on. And we can talk about proof tests or maintenance activities, so we have various reports that we can look at that give you that information. And of course, you can save that report as a PDF for future reference, in addition to always looking at basically the current information, which you could filter based on time periods, but the current information in the dashboard. So SILstat is Exida's live event recording tool. Our users use SILstat to document failures, to document that they've executed proof tests, so that they can evaluate the overall operational performance of their safety instrumented system with the assumed performance. You may have come across this, that many data collection systems end up with a data lake, which basically means there is so much data that you don't really know what to do with it. We're interested in individual drops and we see a huge lake of information. SILstat will help you clear out the lake and identify the drops that are important. SILstat will help you identify problems and areas for improvement in your plant. It can identify devices that are misbehaving, even if those devices travel to different locations within the plant. It can also identify particular areas of the plant that are more prone to failure. Maybe a transmitter is mounted in a very unfortunate location, and therefore an operator or maintenance person will bump into that transmitter on a very regular basis. Maybe once it's not a reportable event, maybe twice it's not a reportable event, but if it would happen 10 times with 10 different people, that may be something that you may want to look into. And that's what SILstat can help you with identifying. So if you are as excited as we are on this new version of SILstat and you want to start recording live event data, you can get started with creating a data philosophy. Obviously, this is something you can start with independently, or Exida's, of course, happy to support you with this as well. In that data philosophy document, you want to determine what is the data that you want to capture. Do you want to limit it to just the safety instrumented system, because that's kind of required in the functional safety standards? Or do you want to record everything? And maybe everything is too much. Maybe you want to record just a certain portion of your plant. How do you want to map third-party systems to SILstat? What is the information that you want to get out of a historian? Or what is the information that you want to send, for example, to an SAP system? And how often do you want to do that? Well, of course, we can all configure that with our data API. And lastly, if you're already a user of Excellentia, you can see how this analysis and design and implementation information can be easily transferred to the operational phase for use in SILstat. If you want to do that, you want to make sure that your Excellentia files are ready to go. And what I mean with that is, if you look, for example, at a layer of protection analysis, in the LOPA tool, you can place those layers of protection in the order of which they will be executed. So maybe an operator responding to an alarm is the first one, followed by a safety instrument function, followed by a pressure relief device. By making sure that those layers of protection are in the right sequence of protecting against the initiating event that starts the whole sequence, we can import that information. And then if an initiating event occurs, we can say, oh, the operator was successful in preventing this initiating event from propagating, which means that the SIF and pressure relief device were never asked to operate. So that's one thing that you can do before really transferring the information over, making sure that that base data is correct. As I mentioned, we're releasing this new SILstat in 2024, which is only a couple of months away. If you're interested in learning more about SILstat, please reach out to your local Exida representative. Exida will be happy to work with you, demo the software, show you what it can do, what it would mean for implementation in your site, and so on. Also, if you want to talk about data philosophy, a key step before you start collecting data, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you're enjoying this 24-hour webathon with Exida.